Let's get started here. Photography has been a part of Deborah's life since she picked up her first camera. It evolved into her passion and is what she does today. She's the author of Digital Infrared Photography, published by Wiley, and an instructor at betterphoto.com, teaching enhancing images and creating works of art, as well as digital infrared photography. And with that, I will go ahead and turn it over to Deb.
Okay, I hope you can see this card. This is one of my favorite photos from Cuba. It was a really fun photo to work with. You know, I love the red car, and I love the architecture in the background. It's very colorful and fun, and it adds a little interesting touch to the image. With classic cars, I'd like to position myself sort of at the grill level and create, you know, a really dynamic photograph, giving the car a really powerful look. And the idea behind this was that I wanted to create an HDR look that accentuates the details and brings out the color. It really makes the car stand out from the background. So I'll show you the before picture. So this is the image that I started with, and you can tell it's a good foundation, but it just is waiting to be brought out. And that's what I'm able to do with Topaz Adjust. So let's get started. Let me show you how I worked with this image in Photoshop. So one of the first things I do is duplicate the background layer. So Command-J or Command-Control-J will duplicate your background layer. And the other thing I like to do is to convert to smart filters. So if you go to Filter, you see Convert to Smart Filters. And if you notice in the Layers palette on the right-hand side, that sets you up with a layer mask. And it also allows you to be able to edit the filter afterward. So that's a good way to get started. You could use it or not, or you could just go ahead and use a layer mask if you choose to. So let's go to Filter, Topaz Labs, Topaz Adjust. So there's a lot of different filters. So if you look at this panel on the left-hand side, you can see this is a preset browser, and there's a lot of different filter choices all the way through here. So you can select any of these to use as a preset. Alternatively, if you want to start on the right-hand side of the panel, you can adjust the exposure regions, the details, the color, all the way down here to the actual noise suppression panel. So if you want to start just on the right-hand side without using a preset, that's perfectly fine. But my personal preference is I like to go ahead and start with a preset. And I'm going to start with HDR Sketch. And the first impression is that, wow, that doesn't look good for my photo, I don't want to use it. But remember that this is a springboard. I'm going to use this as a starting point to go ahead and tweak everything in the image. So you can close this preset browser. On the left-hand side, the small little arrow will close the preset browser. And this way, you have more real estate on your screen. So the first thing I'm going to do is go over here and just follow the logical sequence here. There's the Exposure tab, the Details tab, and the Color tab. And you just work through these sliders to suit your image. So again, you know, the preset is applying the filter globally to every single image with the same setting. So it's really up to us to tweak those settings to make our images look the best. So what I'll do with this image, I'm going to tone down the exposure a little bit, and I'll adjust the regions. The contrast looks pretty good. I'll tone down the brightness a little bit too. It's a little bit bright. There. And just tiny little adjustments because that'll make a big difference if you move those sliders. And if you notice under here, there's a highlight slider and a shadow slider. So if you have any areas in your image that you need to protect the highlights or you need to protect the shadows, you can adjust these sliders and that will do just that. It'll help protect that part of the image from being over or underexposed. In the Details panel, there's a couple of sliders that I worked with. You notice that this brought out a lot of detail, this HDR Sketch preset that I started with. And I actually like all the detail, but I want to soften it on the car because I like the car to look a little bit more on the glossy side. So what I'm going to do is leave the strength right where it is. I'm going to reduce the boost, move that way down to the left, and you can see it changes as I do that. The image starts to get a little softer. And I'll move the threshold down too. So now you can see a big difference in the image. So let me show you before and after. All you have to do is just press with the cursor in the actual panel, you can see that's before, you can see the little hand, and let go, and that's after. You can also use the tab over here on the far left side if you want to go to original or preview. So this is really the look I like for this image. I might adjust the saturation just a little bit. There. And that's the idea I had for this image. I really wanted to bring it out, enhance it, and make it look a little bit more three-dimensional. And since I tweaked this quite a bit, this preset that I started with, it's really modified much further than the actual HDR sketch. So I could just save it as a preset. So if I have a series of cars, maybe I was taking pictures of a couple cars in the same area, and I wanted to be able to apply the same preset to those cars, or maybe I have another image in the future that I want to apply that same setting to. I just go over to Save on this bottom left-hand side, and you get a little dialog box. So I can just type in preset name, HDR look red car, created by Deb, and you can just choose all the different settings. So this one I would choose architecture and buildings, and I could say if it's also good for. And also you can make little notes right down this description. You could say that this is an HDR. So when you hover over the actual preset, it'll give you a little menu. You can see what it's about. So actually I did save that right here in as red car. Now I'll go ahead and press OK to return this image to Photoshop. Now if you look over here in the Layers panel, you could see that I have smart filters already set up. And the reason is because I wanted to give this image a bit more of a dimensional look. So I'm going to paint with black. So if you look over here on the left-hand side of the Photoshop screen, you can see the color picker. I have black enabled. And also I turned the opacity down to about 30%. So the idea is that I can paint away some of this background right here and make the image look more dimensional. And I like to start at 30 rather than, if I start at 100%, it's going to create a very harsh line. And that's not really, wouldn't be very flattering for the image, and it would show. So you don't have to be too technical, just to sort of paint this out. And I'm going to leave it in the sky. As you can see over here, I like what happened with the sky. So you can see the actual before image and the after image. So we came a long way with that HDR sketch preset. So we created an image that is absolutely more dimensional and has more drama and a lot more impact. And it was able to do that really quickly and easily with using one of the presets to start with. So let me go back over to Bridge. And I'll look at another image that I wanted to create an HDR look with. Okay, so this trio that I photographed in Cuba, was really one of my favorite photos, and this would have been actually a very difficult picture to be able to photograph in HDR. Of course, there's a language barrier, and it would have been difficult to move through the exposures fast enough to create an HDR image. But this really works as a single image. You know, I liked their interesting poses, and I wanted to accentuate the detail, the color, and the texture throughout the image, and just create more of an illustrative, artistic look with the image. And this is the image that I started with. So you can see that the foundation is there. It has a lot of color throughout the image. There's a lot of texture, and the men have a lot of personality. You can see that it just really enhanced by using an HDR effect. So I'll go ahead and open this image in Photoshop. And the first thing I'll do is go ahead and duplicate that layer. And I'll open the image in Topaz Adjust. Now what I'm going to do is use one of the presets, not this one. If you want to reset all, just over in the bottom, if you want to just start from total scratch, because what happens is the panel will open up with your last used settings. So I'm going to reset all. And then you can, over here on the left-hand side, you can just choose any of the presets to start with. But of course, you can always start over here on the right-hand side too. But I'm going to use, I'll use Portrait Drama. And I'll use that as a starting point for this particular image. So what I'll do is just go ahead and close that preset browser. That way I'm getting more real estate. And again, this is just a global effect that's applied to the image. I'm just going to tweak it for this particular image. So what I'm going to do is I'll just adjust the exposure slightly and increase the region. So these are all just little things you can do to tweak your image. I'm going to increase the contrast slightly, and also the brightness just a little bit. And really the highlights and the detail, the highlights and the shadows look pretty good, so I really don't need to use any of these sliders for this image. But I'll just move down to the Details tab. And the Details tab just increases the strength a little bit in the boost and the threshold. So this, these are all just little negotiable features that you can work on with your image. And the saturation, I think I'll do that. I'll increase the saturation slightly. And the regions. And I'll leave the saturation, maybe just decrease that saturation boost. So this looks pretty good to me as far as the way that it looks. And I could save it as a preset here. Again, I would just go down to save and save that. But this is just a very slight modification of this particular filter. But I'll show you what I actually did save it as a preset. So you can see this is what I had here. And I'll open it in Photoshop. And I'll show you something you can do too. So I like this effect. You can see the before and after. This is where I started, and this is where I ended up. So here I was able to really bring out the color, the detail. You can see a lot of the painted, peeling texture in the walls, and that to me is really what makes an interesting photo as far as creating an HDR look. So what I'm going to do, and you can do this really easily, is you can use Control-Command-F, or you can just go up to the filter and choose this very first Topaz Adjust. And what that does is automatically just runs the filter one more time. So it duplicates your efforts. You don't have to go back into the panel and redo everything that you just did. Photoshop will do it for you. And then what I would suggest is just going ahead and reducing that opacity. Just bring it down to where you think it looks good. And that's all there is to it. So that's really easy. Just one more time, you just go up to the filter panel and Topaz Adjust, or whatever filter that you use, it'll automatically run that filter again. So I'll go back over to Bridge. And one of my favorite cars, I'll show you this. This is one of my favorite photos that I took in Cuba. And if you hail a taxi in Cuba, it's likely to look like this one. And there's a lot of big, beautiful, classic cars that are used for transportation, and they make wonderful subjects, and they have great personality. And one of my favorite ways to photograph classic cars is to use a wide-angle lens and get eye-to-eye with the headlights. This lower angle sort of accentuates the car's best features, and it gives it a lot more character. And you can see it really fills the frame and makes it a lot more dynamic. And if you incorporate some of the architecture into the background, it gives the car a little bit of sense of location, and also adds another element of interest to the photo. And these are all just compositional elements and choices to think about when you're composing the image. Well, this is the image that I started with, and you can tell, it's a good foundation photo. It's just waiting. It's just waiting to have some of the HDR effects brought to it and bring out the color and make a more interesting image. So I'll go ahead and open this image in Photoshop and also duplicate that layer. So it's just Command-Control-J and duplicate that. And what I'll do is to go ahead and create a smart filter. And you can see that little B layer is already right there. And go to Filter, Topaz Labs, Topaz Adjust. And again, it opens up the panel. And I'm going to use one of my very, very favorite filter effects, and it's Spicify. And I like to use Spicify even on an HDR image because it's going to create just a really kind of an interesting effect. Brings out the color, brings out the detail, and it works a little bit differently on a lot of images. But I think the key working with this is just to sort of tweak it to suit your individual photo, and also modify the end result so that you have certain features brought out or not. So I do like this Spicify, so I'll start right here. And I'll just make any other adjustments. I think I might just increase this exposure a notch. And regions I'll leave maybe just brightness. So these are all negotiable. Whatever your particular image is, you're going to just use those different settings to suit your image. So I'll move down to details. So if I need to increase or decrease the details, you can do that. And certainly if you just want to be quick and fast, you can just press Spicify and return the image to Photoshop. But these give you a little bit more control. So I like this the way it is. So what I'll do is go ahead and open the image in Photoshop. And I have Smart Filters already enabled. And you can see right here where it says Topaz Adjust. So if I just decided this is not working for me, I can go right back into the Topaz Adjust panel and make other adjustments. What I'm going to do with the Smart Filter layer is to paint away just a little bit of this color in the road, just to eliminate some of that redness. And also with my classic cars, I like to keep the bumpers and chrome really white, so I'm going to illuminate any of that color just by brushing it away, and also on that chrome right there. So it's super easy to do. Again, if you're using a brush around 30% opacity, you can see this menu here. This is this brush size, and this is the hardness. I have the hardness all the way to the left, meaning it's soft. So I'll go ahead and just paint that out. And that looks pretty good to me. So one of the things I'll also do is to go ahead and duplicate that layer, and I'll open this in, actually I'll convert it for smart filters. And what that's going to allow me to do is make some changes. So with classic cars, actually if I'm out, or if you're out shooting maybe at a car show and you want to give a car really a glossy, shiny look, and that's what I really like to do with a lot of the classic cars, I'll use a filter called Portrait Smooth. So I'll just choose Portrait Smooth preset over here on the left side of the panel, and immediately you can see a dramatic difference in the car. You can see a lot more detail here. It's a little bit brighter, and I'll go ahead and show you the preview. So it's eliminating some of the details in the car, which I really like. I think the car should look a little bit glossy. I don't mind that the background has more detail, but I like the look of Portrait Smooth on the car, so that is my classic car secret. So if you want to duplicate that, you certainly can. And what I'd like to do is just apply that setting to the car. I don't necessarily want it in the background. I kind of like the background and everything the way that it was. So I'll go ahead and press OK. Now here I'm going to, with the smart filters, I'm going to invert this mask. And this is really simple. It sounds a lot more complicated than it is. Just Control-Command-I, and you can see that the filter effects were just eliminated, but they're not. I'm just hiding it. That's all I'm doing here. And I'll paint with white. So I'll go over here to the color picker, switch to white, and do the same thing I just did previously when I was erasing the effect from the road. I'm just going to paint in that effect on the car. I'll go ahead and increase the opacity here just so you can see the effect a little quicker. So that's how you make the car a lot more shiny. You just go over the car and you're making the bumper and everything really glisten. So Portrait Smooth is really great. So if you have not necessarily even a classic car, if you have a contemporary car and you want to make it really shiny, that's a good way to do it. So you can see where we've gone from there to there with Portrait Smooth. So that's a really easy way to work with the image. So I'll go over back to Bridge, and I'll show you this image. This image is one that I had taken in Cuba, and I love the effect. You can see a little bit more detail here. I've got a lot more detail in the wrought iron and also in the image. Here's the before picture. So you can see that it's just waiting really to have a lot of this brought out. So here's the after and here's before. So one of the ideas is to work with this image in Photoshop to create a look that is more reminiscent of HDR. What I'm going to do is enhance the texture of the beard and also the eyes and the skin and all the background. And this man runs a photography gallery. As you can see in the background, you can see his pictures, and the walls are colorfully painted, and it provides a nice backdrop for the man. So what I wanted to do was create an image that looked like an HDR effect image just by working with one of the presets in Topaz Adjust. So I'll go ahead and duplicate the layer. That's the first thing I always do. And also you can convert to smart filters if you want. So I'll go to Filter, Topaz Labs, Topaz Adjust. And with this image I'm going to experiment with a few of those and to see the best effect. And what I ended up with was I like the starting point with clarity. And that gave me a good springboard, a good ballpark area to work with this image to create an HDR effect. So what I'd like to do is just go ahead and change some of the settings. So I think the exposure looks pretty good and the regions, but I'll just increase the contrast just a little bit. And don't be afraid of these because these are all negotiable. You can move these back and forth, and if you need to reset them, just go down to the bottom of the panel and reset all. I'm going to reduce the brightness slightly. And the recovery, the highlight and the shadow area looks perfectly fine, so I'm going to leave that just as it is. And then I'll just move down to the Details tab. And what I'll do is increase the details just ever so slightly, and also the boost. And I'll just move down to the Saturation tab. And what I'll do is increase saturation here. So maybe 6, that looks good. Regions, just a little bit. And you can see the before and after. So this is where we've come with this clarity slider. So this is where we were. And now we've really brought out a lot more drama, a lot more intensity, really more of an HDR look with a single image. And that's what sometimes you really need to do. Perhaps you're on a boat and your subject is moving and you just can only make one exposure. This is a good way to create an HDR look easily and quickly. So again, if I like these settings, I kind of modified them quite a bit. So I'll just go over here to save. Again, you can just save it as a preset, and I can say, you know, gallery man, and I can type in my name. So just fill in all the values here and click OK. And then just open the image into Photoshop. And if you want to apply a layer mask, you can do that right here and erase any part that you want, or if you're using smart filters you're already set up. But actually I like the look here. I mean, he has a lot of presence in the composition, and he's standing out from the background, and yet everything still has a very detailed HDR look, and that's that was the idea here that I was going for with this particular image. So that one was a preset based on clarity. So I'll go back to Bridge, and I'll show you a little bit different. This is one of the pictures that I took early morning, and I love the pastel background, but when I made the picture, of course, you can see that it's very, very pale, and it's not as, doesn't have as much presence. What I wanted to do was just enhance that and give the image a little more detail and color, and you're able to do that through creating an HDR look. And what happens is it just gives the image a lot more definition. So what I will do is to go ahead and open this image in Photoshop and duplicate the background layer. That's always first. So I have this layer right here. Is Control-Command-J to duplicate the background layer. And also you can convert to smart filters. Again, that's just filter, convert for smart filters. That's all there is to it. And that allows you to be set up with a layer mask or re-edit the filter effects if you wish. So this I'm going to go ahead and open in Filter, Topaz Labs, Adjust. And here again on the left-hand side we have all the presets. And of course I'm going to go for my favorite. I'll go for Spicify. Now what that does is to create a very intense effect. You can see that it's very strong on the man, and this is a little bit too much, and that's okay. That's why we use the smart filters, so we can erase part of that effect or all of that effect that you want. So I'll go ahead and open this image in Photoshop. And you can see here I already have the smart filters layer enabled. And I'll go over here and switch colors, because if you paint with black, you'll see the effect. If I'm painting with white as it was on that previous image, then I won't see any effect at all. And also make sure that I'm down to 30% opacity and just paint away the effect on this man. So that's really all there is to it. So you can apply the filter effects selectively on your subject. And this makes a dramatic difference. You can leave just a little bit of the effect, not too strong. So that looks pretty good to me. So this is where we started. That was the before image, and that is the after image. So you can see how quickly you can work through the various filters and effects to create an HDR looking image very easily with Topaz Adjust and in Photoshop. So go back to Bridge. And I'd like to show you one more picture. And this is really easy and fast. This is colonial architecture, the Cuban colonial architecture. And I love the interesting detail and texture and the painted walls. You can see the pink, the yellow, everything is blue. It just really has a lot of interest and drama. And this is the before pictures. This is before I made any of the adjustments. So you can see what a dramatic difference. Here the sky is very pale. There's not a lot of details in the area here on the sign, but using one of the presets in Topaz Adjust was able to just bring this image and make it pop, like make it have a lot more drama and a lot more interest. So I can show you how we do that. real quick in Photoshop. So again, just go ahead and duplicate the background layer and just go to Filter, Topaz Labs, Topaz Adjust, and the filter will open. And you have all these different filter choices again on your left. So if you have an idea where you want to go with an image, perhaps you want to use one of these sliders, one of these presets, you can use that. But I think what I'd like to do is go ahead and use Spicify. And you can see how dramatic the image is here. So I have, this is start image, and this is the end image. So really, that's just one preset. I'm not even going to make any adjustments right here because I think this is just fine the way it is. So I'll go ahead and open the image in Photoshop. And again, if I wanted to intensify the effect, I could go ahead back up to Filter, Topaz Adjust, and run that filter once again. But I really like the effect just as it is right out of Topaz Adjust. So that was before, and that is after. So thank you. If you have any questions, please let me know. I'm really excited to share with you some of the ideas that I have working with Topaz Adjust. And sorry we got off to a late start, but I hope you enjoyed the presentation and have a few ideas for you.